Welcome to the Grim Murders channel, where we explore the most horrifying cases together. Today, we continue delving into the notorious Chinese serial killer Yang Xinhai, who terrorized the country for 4 years, claiming the lives of 67 innocent people. China's most terrifying man left a trail of victims across 4 provinces: Anhui, Hebei, Shandong, and even his own hometown, Hunan. Over 4 years, the number of victims reached 67. This butcher of China was none other than Yang Xinhai. Why did it take 4 years and nearly 70 deaths before this cold-blooded murderer was finally caught? Was the punishment fitting for all the atrocities he committed? You are watching the case series of China's most terrifying hammer-wielding madman. 4 years, 67 victims, only on this channel. As always, if this story leaves an impression on you, don't hesitate to drop a like as encouragement for us. And if this is our first time crossing paths, be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with the most classic crime cases. Now let's go back to China in 2001, to a remote village in Hunan province. After a lifetime of hardship, Han Fangding found her greatest fortune in old age, a devoted son who visited and took care of her every morning. However, for the past 2 days, he had not come by, nor had her grandchildren visited. This worried Han immensely. Her son, Li Tand, had recently suffered the loss of his wife. Since her sudden passing, he had been struggling to raise their 2 young children alone. His eldest son, Li Yongli, was 13, and his daughter, Li Yongyang, was 9. Both were at an age where they needed special attention and care from their father. Han Fangding understood that her son was grieving and might have missed a day or 2 of visiting as usual. But then the neighbors mentioned that they had not seen Li Tand anywhere, neither at work, nor at the market, nor even walking along the village roads. This prompted Han Fangding to visit her son's house. When she arrived, she found the door locked, and an eerie silence enveloped the entire house. At first, she thought her son had taken the children on a trip to ease their sorrow. But she immediately dismissed the idea. Her son would never leave the village without telling her. Moreover, if they had truly left, someone would have seen them go. Han knocked on the door, but only the sound of cows responded from inside. This was extremely strange. Li Tand always let his cattle out to graze in the morning, only bringing them back in at night. If he had gone on a trip, he wouldn't have left the cows locked up without food. Too many things didn't add up. Determined to uncover the truth, Han used the spare key in the courtyard, unlocked the gate, and stepped inside. She walked past the cattle shed and across the small yard before reaching the bedroom. Through the window, she saw her son, Li Tand, along with her grandson, Li Yongli, and granddaughter, Li Yongyang, lying in bed as if they were in a deep sleep. But as Han leaned in for a closer look and called their names, she was met with a horrifying sight. Inside the small room, there were 2 beds. Li Tand lay beside his son on the large bed, surrounded by a pool of blood. Their clothes were soaked, and Li Tand's head had been brutally attacked beyond recognition. A small hole was visible on his forehead. His grandson had suffered the same fate. However, Han Fangding noticed a heartbreaking detail. Her grandson's hands were covered in mud. At that moment, she realized that her little grandson had tried desperately to escape the murderer. He had fought for his life until his last breath. The 3rd victim was her granddaughter, Li Yongyang. The child lay on the small bed, stripped of clothing. A similar hole was found on her forehead, just like her father. In an instant, Han Fangding had lost both her son and her 2 beloved grandchildren. Overwhelmed with grief, despair, and shock, she immediately demanded answers when the police arrived. She wanted to know who the monster was that had taken her family. However, it would take 8 months before the case was finally solved. Han Fangding was not alone in her pain. At that time, a series of murders with similar methods had occurred across 4 provinces in eastern and central China. The people called the killer the Hammer Maniac, while the media dubbed him the Monster Killer. This serial murderer was none other than Yang Xinhai. When I kill, I feel an intense urge. I want to take more lives. I don't care whether they deserve to live or not. That's not my concern. I have no desire to be a part of society. Society does not belong to me. These were the words of Yang Xinhai when speaking to investigators after his arrest. And yet, if you had been there on July 17, 1968, you wouldn't have noticed anything particularly strange about this man. Even if you had witnessed his childhood in a remote village in Zhengyang County, Hunan Province, China, all you would have seen was a silent child among many siblings, born to poor parents struggling to survive. You would have quickly recognized him as a reserved, introverted boy with artistic talent. Many years later, Yang Xinhai's father would tell investigators that he had noticed his son's unusual ability from an early age. He could accurately recreate anything he saw through drawing. Young Yang Xinhai was ambitious and worked hard. Neighbors described him as an honest, diligent young man who never caused trouble. But they were wrong. None of the people who had known that quiet child realized that he had always hated the poverty of his birthplace. And this man had always been certain that he could escape his impoverished life on his own terms. Unfortunately, that immense ambition became the catalyst for the years that followed. As Yang Xinhai grew older, he increasingly realized how disadvantaged he was compared to his peers. Things worsened when he entered high school and couldn't afford any fees. His school was far from his village, so his father sent him to live with a wealthier relative. But unfortunately for Yang Xinhai, this relative ostracized him. He was not allowed to eat with the family. He was forced to gather his own firewood and find his own food when he was hungry. The only care he received in that household was the roof over his head, shielding him from the sun and rain. It was during this period that Yang Xinhai began to long for the warmth of his family. For the first time, he no longer dwelled on the poverty that had tormented him for years. At least back home, they had endured it together. At school, his situation was even worse. He couldn't afford even the most basic things like lunch tickets that most students had. While the other children exchanged these tickets for meals at school, Yang Xinhai had to cook his own food with wild vegetables he gathered from the fields. After class and on weekends, he raised livestock to earn some money. All of this happened during his adolescence. His insecurities grew. It was no surprise that his grades plummeted. Frustrated with school, Yang Xinhai decided to drop out. A week before he left school, he visited his father and complained about the bitterness he endured at his relative's house and his inability to afford meal tickets. Right after their conversation, his father hurried to the school cafeteria, carrying bags of wheat, hoping to exchange them for meal tickets for his son. But it was too late. The teachers informed him that Yang Xinhai had been absent for several days. His entire family panicked. His poor mother broke down in tears, fearing the worst. Everyone searched for the teenage boy, but his whereabouts remained unknown. Looking back, the thought of this moment is chilling, because it was around this time that Yang Xinhai's morality began to plummet like a freefall off a cliff. One day, Yang Xinhai sent a letter home, saying that he was fine and had dropped out of school to pursue a more practical path. He had gone to work to earn money, but he quickly realized that making a living wasn't easy either. He found a job at a construction site, but he wasn't a builder. He worked as a cook, preparing meals for the workers. It was an honest job, but the low wages soon led him to change jobs again. One of the reasons he constantly had to change jobs was because of frequent wage arrears. This happened so often that eventually, Yang Xinhai didn't have a single penny left and committed his first crime. Enraged by months of unpaid wages, Yang Xinhai stole and sold an aluminum pot from the restaurant where he worked. When he received the 133 yuan from the theft, he felt an unusual thrill spreading throughout his body, like a light bulb suddenly illuminating in his mind. At that moment, Yang Xinhai realized and decided that this was the easiest way to make money. After all the efforts he had made in high school and the hard work he had put in over the years, for the first time in his life, he felt he was rewarded for what he did. And even though it was not a legitimate reward, he knew this path would make his life better than being an honest person. His crimes became more frequent, and unfortunately for him, strict laws never spare criminals. In 1988, while attempting a pickpocketing crime, Yang Xinhai was caught. He was sent to a labor reform camp, a punishment much harsher than his crime. But that was China, and the law was the law. After 2 years, Yang Xinhai was released. He returned to his small village and continued his petty thefts. During this time, he met a woman, and the two fell in love and planned to get married. However, in 1991, once again, he was arrested for theft in another city. The police called his father to identify him, but he was not allowed to speak to his father. Yet, somehow, he managed to communicate with his girlfriend. She promised to wait for him until he finished serving his sentence. That promise helped him quickly endure a year in prison. Unfortunately, the girl did not keep her word. When he returned from jail, Yang Xinhai attended a wedding in the village and was shocked to discover that the bride was his former lover. And of course, the groom was not him. The young man left his hometown heartbroken, ashamed and furious, never to return. No one knows exactly what happened to Yang Xinhai's heart, nor which demon gradually took over his mind. But after this event, he began committing sexual assaults. In 1996, too lonely and too poor to seek the company of prostitutes, Yang Xinhai attempted to assault a woman walking along a deserted road in Zhengyang County. Fortunately, the woman managed to escape and reported the attack to the police, leading to the arrest of the predator. Yang Xinhai was sentenced to 5 years in prison. During this time, a sick hatred for humanity began to grow within him. He developed a complete disregard for human life, adopting a cold, detached view of the sacred nature of existence. Perhaps if the authorities had known just how dangerous Yang Xinhai would become upon his release, they would have kept him locked up forever. But unfortunately, no one could predict the future. In the year 2000, Yang Xinhai was granted early parole, 1 year before the end of his sentence. And after stepping out of the prison gates for the first time in 4 years, he became consumed with arrogance. He was eager, ready to set the world on fire. At noon on September 20th, 2000, a villager from a remote village in Hunan province decided to visit an elderly couple he hadn't seen in a long time. But what this neighbor found in the home of 70-year-old Yang Bowen and his wife, Zhai San, was an utterly horrific scene. The elderly couple had been robbed and brutally attacked with a sharp object. The most horrifying detail was the hole in their foreheads. The cruel perpetrator had taken the time to carve a hole into their heads, likely using a steel rod and a hammer. At that time, the case was so bizarre and unusual that the villagers began investigating before the police arrived. And when they completed their inquiry, all clues pointed to a neighbor, a man named Yang Deli. No one could believe that he, a frail and weak man, could have overpowered someone like Qi Junying so easily. What they didn't know was that Yang Xinhai was a despicable predator. He sneaked into victims' homes while they were fast asleep, after stalking them for days or even weeks. The villagers wrongly accused a man who had a conflict with the victims, similar to what happened to Yang Deli in Hunan province. This man owned 40 pigeons, but on the night of Qi Junying's murder, someone stole 37 of them, leaving only 3. When he went to report the theft, he was immediately arrested, as the police believed he was trying to divert attention from the case. However, after extensive investigation, it was proven that he was not the murderer. Still, due to his past thefts, he was sent to a labor camp and released nearly a year later. Later, police believed that Yang Xinhai had stolen the pigeons. They also suspected that this was not his first time visiting the village, which allowed him to be well aware of the poor relationship between Qi Junying and the wrongly accused suspect. Simply put, Yang Xinhai carefully selected his victims and ensured that someone else would take the fall, crafting a perfect scenario that easily manipulated the police. On August 15, 2001, Yang Xinhai continued his killing spree. This time, he returned to Hunan and took the lives of an entire family of 3, a 42-year-old father, a 12-year-old daughter, and a 9-year-old son. He overpowered each victim and left holes in their foreheads. After finishing his slaughter, he committed an unspeakable crime against the 12-year-old girl. In this case, it was the child's grandmother who discovered the gruesome scene. This was the very case mentioned at the beginning of this video. Not stopping there, the following month, Yang Xinhai struck again, taking the lives of 2 more people in the same province. He broke the door lock, entered the house, attacked the homeowner and his cousin until they succumbed to their injuries, then stole 3 coins. In reality, investigators believed that Yang Xinhai did not care about the money. He acted as if the murders were the real reward, while the thefts were merely an afterthought. He derived pleasure from taking lives. In December, another couple in Hunan province suffered the same fate. They were brutally assaulted and killed, each with a hole in their forehead. By this time, people had begun calling Yang Xinhai the Hammer-Wielding Madman. This raises an important question. Why the hole in the forehead? It is possible that he accidentally discovered excitement in leaving a mark on his victims' bodies and then decided to make it his signature. Or perhaps, while in prison, he had fantasized about his future crimes and was now carrying them out exactly as he had imagined. Whatever the reason, Yang Xinhai continued leaving this signature mark, even after he stopped physically assaulting his female victims. No one knew why he halted these attacks. Some speculated that he did so to confuse the police, believing that he was under surveillance. But he overestimated the investigative team because, in reality, they had no evidence. He had also successfully spaced out his crimes over time and distance. He never struck twice in the same city. Never were multiple crimes reported under the same police jurisdiction. Yang Xinhai also targeted impoverished families, knowing that their deaths would not attract as much attention as those of wealthy households. At that time, police departments did not share information across cities or provinces, preventing the establishment of a larger investigative network. Because of this, Yang Xinhai continued his spree until 2002. As expected, 2002 turned out to be his bloodiest year. Also the year when law enforcement began to understand the full extent of this cold-blooded butcher. On January 6th, a family of 5 became Yang Xinhai's next victims. He assaulted them until their final breaths and then continued his perverse frenzy by violating one of their bodies. Beyond that, his pattern remained unchanged: attack, steal, and leave the signature hole. 21 days later, Yang Xinhai continued his killing spree, attacking 3 more people and once again leaving behind his gruesome mark. After that, he took a short break. On June 30th, he resumed his killing spree, targeting a family of 4 and assaulting one of the victims. On July 28th, continuing his series of crimes, he ended the lives of 4 more people. But this time, he assaulted 2 of them. One question that investigators repeatedly asked was, how did he manage to escape and never get caught by civilians or the police? The answer, according to the killer himself, was patience and meticulous preparation before committing his crimes. His years in prison had taught him a great deal about how the police operated and how to evade them. He also had his own tricks to avoid detection, such as wearing socks instead of shoes. This ensured that he never left shoe prints on the floors or the ground at the crime scenes. Although he left DNA at most of his crime scenes, his plans were executed so flawlessly that the police believed the perpetrator was living in a residential area. Meanwhile, Yang Xinhai was nothing more than a nomad with an insatiable thirst for blood. On October 22nd, Yang Xinhai sneaked into the home of a family in a remote village in Hunan province. Using a shovel, he repeatedly struck them while they were asleep. The victims were Fang Xian, 34, and his 6-year-old daughter. After ensuring they were no longer breathing, he violated the young girl. His next victim was Fang's wife, Wu Qinghua, who was pregnant. During the assault, she may have attempted to escape. But tragically, both she and her unborn child did not survive. At this point, Yang Xinhai was still several steps ahead of the police, but his reign of terror was about to come to an end. His luck was running out. In November 2002, an officer and her colleagues arrived at the scene of a crime in a remote village in Hunan. She realized that an unsolved case from her hometown bore striking similarities. A family of 5 had been murdered in Gali village, Juma City. The method of killing was identical to a case she was currently handling, where a family of 4 had been slain, 2 women had been assaulted, and 1 had nearly escaped. A few months later, this information was shared across police departments in Hunan province, and authorities realized they were dealing with a massive case, a serial killer. In mid-November 2002, while Yang Xinhai was in the midst of another attack, assaulting 1 person and killing 2 others in yet another remote village, the Hunan Provincial Police made a decisive move. They launched a full-scale investigation into the string of murders. They established a special investigation team with the sole mission of capturing the elusive killer. The police meticulously studied the madman's crimes through the testimonies of surviving victims in order to build a profile of the killer. They quickly realized that the perpetrator had a criminal record. Thus, when Yang Xinhai attacked his next victims in November, a couple in their 60s, the police decided to review the records of individuals released from labor camps for theft, robbery, or assault between 1995 and August 2001. They searched every prison, checking and comparing 30,000 fingerprints of men aged 25 to 40, based on the suspect's profile. Unfortunately, they still found no leads. The blood and hair samples collected at the crime scenes did not match any of the suspects they had screened. Throughout this process, the police faced a major dilemma. While their investigation had hit a dead end, they coincidentally uncovered the perpetrators of other murder cases. Meanwhile, Yang Xinhai continued his killing spree. The police were unsure whether to feel relieved or frustrated by the situation. On December 1st and December 13th, Yang Xinhai wiped out 2 families in Hunan. However, by that time, numerous uniformed officers had flooded the streets and remote villages of the province. They no longer cared about whether they would alarm the murderer. They had reached their limit. Another innocent life could not be lost. At this point, Yang Xinhai had left Hunan province. On December 15th, he committed another murder in Anhui province, where he had previously killed before. Then, he remained inactive until February, when he discovered more isolated areas in Hunan, places the police had not yet reached. On February 5th, Yang Xinhai attacked a family of 3, leaving 1 critically injured and 2 dead on the spot. 13 days later, for the first time, he targeted another family in the same town. He killed 4 people and assaulted 2. This attack was shockingly bold. It was a major embarrassment for the Hunan police, who had been convinced that he only attacked poor rural villages. Once again, Yang Xinhai left the police bewildered. By March 2003, he had committed at least 10 more crimes in the southern part of Hunan province, an average of 2 cases per month. This time, he continued evading the police, but they had now chosen to play the long game. At this stage, the investigative team had linked all the crimes Yang Xinhai had committed in Hunan. They knew what tools he used, how he wielded them, and who he targeted. They were also certain that the killer was a poor, introverted man with a criminal past. The police issued a bounty of 100,000 yuan, equivalent to around 340 million Vietnamese dong at that time. It may not have been a massive reward, but it was enough to enrage the villagers. The people of Hunan now fully grasped the terrifying reality of these brutal murders. Fear gripped the entire province. Citizens were unable to sleep at night. They built fences around their homes, something they had never done before the killings began. Innocent men were suspected, and the once peaceful and open neighborhoods became tense and distrustful. The police assigned volunteers to every village in the province. Millions of posters featuring the murderer's face flooded the streets. In villages too remote to reach, officers stood watch, waiting for the Hammer Madman. Hunan had prepared itself well to capture the killer. But unfortunately, they never caught him. Yang Xinhai had left Hunan for good. His next target was a place where he had never committed a murder before, Shandong province. On April 0th, he brutally killed a young couple who were expecting their first child. By this point, the police in Shandong were already familiar with his methods. They recognized the crime scene as identical to the cases reported in Hunan and Anhui. Immediately, they coordinated with the other provinces and began implementing the same security measures. This action may have frightened Yang Xinhai, effectively paralyzing him for the next 5 months. He put the hammer aside. However, during these 5 months, he moved on to yet another province where he had never struck before, Hebei. On August 0th, Yang Xinhai slaughtered an entire family using an axe he had stolen from a neighbor's house. It was a different weapon, but he attempted to use the same tactics to mislead the villagers. Once again, the police immediately recognized it as the work of the Hammer Madman. But this time, it was clear that Yang Xinhai was growing desperate. Just 3 days later, before the Hebei authorities could respond effectively, he struck another family in a nearby village. 2 massacres in 5 days. For the first time in Yang Xinhai's murderous history, the police sensed his desperation and had an eerie premonition about his future that he had nowhere left to hide. Every province he tried to escape to was already waiting for him. Yang Xinhai was like a trapped mole with no way out. Wherever he tried to flee, the authorities were already there, ready to capture him. Since the Hunan police began their investigation into his crimes, studying his movements and behavior, they had come terrifyingly close to identifying him. All they needed was a face and a name. They knew they were looking for a homeless drifter, highly skilled at concealing his identity and tracks. They were certain he had learned these skills in prison. They also knew he had never returned to his hometown since his first crime. Applying this knowledge to their criminal database, only a few names remained. One of them was Yang Xinhai. At this point, the police still did not know for certain that Yang Xinhai was the deranged butcher they had been hunting. His father, when interrogated, even insisted that his son's name was not on the police's suspect list. Investigators had even taken a blood sample from Yang Xinhai's father in an attempt to find any genetic matches, but found nothing. The police weren't sure who the killer was yet, but they knew they were close, so very close. On November 2nd, 2003, they received a report about a suspicious man loitering around a public hall in Sangzhou City. The man had no job, no identification, and slept in public bathhouses. Officers instructed the hall staff not to alarm him, but to keep an eye on him. The next day, a few officers arrived at the scene and kept him under close surveillance. As he wandered aimlessly near an elementary school in the city, he quickly realized he was being followed. The moment the police moved in, he tried to escape. But it was too late. He was completely surrounded. Yang Xinhai was arrested. Inside his pocket, police found a knife and 500 yuan in cash. Immediately, they knew he matched the profile of the killer in every way that he even spoke with a Hunan accent. The DNA test results came back, confirming the police's worst fears. They had finally captured the monster. "What is your name?" the officers asked. Yang Xinhai. 67 lives taken. 23 victims assaulted. 10 people attacked over 4 years across 4 provinces. Yang Xinhai was, without a doubt, the most terrifying serial killer China had seen since its independence in 1949. Yet, he remained completely indifferent. At first, he was evasive, even arrogant. He told the police, "If you have evidence, I'll admit it. If not, don't try to scare me." But when they presented him with the DNA proof and pressed him for answers, he scoffed. "I know DNA is science. But isn't it only 99% accurate? So why am I the 1%? The police were quite certain that Duong Tianhai did not fully grasp the severity of his crimes, so they tried to explain it to him. However, the murderer cut them off with a single sentence. "Summarize it. I understand everything." Clearly, Duong Tianhai was terrified when confronted with his own crimes, yet he remained composed. In the end, he confessed to everything. He spoke like a bird, meticulously detailing every act of violence and depravity. He described the tools he used and explained in chilling detail how each crime excited him. He was insane, but insanity was no excuse for such horrific crimes. Duong Tianhai never attempted to plead insanity. He showed no remorse. In fact, he even expressed regret that he couldn't continue his killing spree. The police were baffled by his behavior. He made no attempt to save himself, as if he was deliberately throwing himself under the bus to rack up one final victim. The last person he wanted to kill was himself. At 8 a.m. on October 1, 2004, the first trial began and lasted until 12:30 p.m. Afterward, everyone was given a 30-minute lunch break. Duong Tianhai and the court staff all ate, but the murderer was the only one constantly praising the meal and thanking the court staff. This left them utterly bewildered. As the trial continued, even in its final moments, Duong Tianhai remained full of energy. His voice was even louder than the judges, resembling a man who had just won the lottery rather than someone facing the death penalty. At 7:40 a.m. on the second day of the trial, Duong Tianhai was convicted. At that very moment, he stated that he would not appeal, despite having 15 days to do so. On February 14, 2004, Duong Tianhai was executed by firing squad, a far more merciful end than what he had inflicted upon his 67 victims. And now, what do you think about this case? About Duong Tianhai and his twisted sense of excitement when attacking his victims? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss. Before you go, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on the most chilling crime stories.